What happens when the truth you've kept hidden for years threatens to destroy the most important relationship in your life? This is the story of a secret that almost shattered a lifelong friendship. I never thought a new neighbor could shake up my life like this. My name's Ethan, and I've been living in this sleepy little coastal town for years. In a small house with a creaky porch and a view of the ocean that makes everything feel just a bit more bearable. I'm in my late 30s, a graphic designer who works from home, and I've gotten used to the rhythm of this place. The way the waves crash at night, the way the seagulls scream in the morning. It's predictable, comforting even, but sometimes it feels like I'm just drifting through my days, waiting for something to jolt me awake. Then James moved in next door. It was a foggy morning when I first saw him, unloading boxes from a beat-up pickup truck. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a mop of dark hair that kept falling into his eyes as he worked. There was something about the way he moved deliberate, almost cautious, like he was carrying more than just boxes. My heart skipped a beat, and I don't say that lightly. I'm not the type to get flustered over a stranger, but there was something about him that made me pause, coffee mug halfway to my lips, staring out my kitchen window like some kind of creep. I didn't know his name yet, but I couldn't stop watching. He didn't seem to notice me, thank God, but I caught the way his jaw tightened when he dropped a box. The way he muttered something under his breath and ran a hand through his hair. There was a story there, I could tell. Something heavy, something he wasn't sharing with the world. I shook it off and went back to my work, but that moment stuck with me, like a song you can't get out of your head. Over the next few weeks, I started to piece together who James was, or at least who I thought. He was in his early 40s, I guessed, with a quiet intensity that made him stand out in a town full of retirees and young families. He kept to himself mostly, but I'd see him sometimes, walking along the beach at dusk or sitting on his porch, with a book, his glasses slipping down his nose. I'd wave, and he'd nod back, polite but distant. It drove me a little crazy, if I'm honest. I wanted to know more, but I wasn't about to go knocking on his door like some nosy neighbor. Then, one evening, everything changed. I was out in my backyard, struggling to fix a wobbly fence post, when I heard a crash from his side of the property. I peeked over the hedge and saw him standing there, surrounded by shattered glass, looking like he'd just seen a ghost. "You okay?" I called out, before I could stop myself. He froze, then turned to me, his eyes wide with something I couldn't quite place, fear, maybe, or embarrassment. "Yeah, just dropped a bottle," he said, his voice low and rough, like he wasn't used to talking. He bent down to pick up the pieces, and I noticed his hands were shaking. I don't know what made me do it, but I hopped the hedge and started helping him clean up. We worked in silence for a minute, the air thick with something unspoken. When we were done, he looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. "Thanks, Ethan," he said, and my name in his mouth felt like a spark. That was the start of it. We started talking more after that, small things at first, like the weather or the best coffee spot in town. But there was always this undercurrent, this pull between us that I couldn't ignore. I'd catch him watching me sometimes, his expression unreadable, and it made my chest ache in a way I hadn't felt in years. I'd been out for a long time, but I'd never been good at relationships. Too much baggage, too many walls. James, though, he had walls of his own, and I wanted to know what was behind them. One night, over beers on my porch, he let something slip. We were talking about why he'd moved here, and he got quiet, staring out at the ocean. I needed a fresh start, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Somewhere I could figure things out. I didn't push, but I could tell there was more to it. A divorce, maybe, or something heavier. I wanted to ask, but I didn't. Instead, I just sat there with him, the silence between us comfortable, but charged, like we were both waiting for the other to make a move. As the weeks turned into months, our friendship grew. We'd go for walks on the beach, share takeout on slow evenings, even work on little projects together, like fixing up his old patio furniture or repainting my fence. Every moment with him felt like it was leading somewhere, but neither of us was brave enough to name it. I'd catch myself staring at his hands, the way they moved when he talked, or the way his laugh lines crinkled when he smiled. I was falling for him, and it scared the hell out of me. But there was always that secret, that thing he wasn't saying. I'd see it in the way he'd tense up when his phone rang, or the way he'd change the subject when I got too close to something personal. It wasn't my place to pry, but it gnawed at me. What was he running from? And why did it feel like, whatever it was, it could break this fragile thing we were building? One afternoon, I found out. We were in his kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, when a letter slid out from a stack of papers on the counter. I didn't mean to read it, but my eyes caught the words custody and hearing before he snatched it away. His face went pale, and for a second, I thought he might bolt. "James," I said softly, "you don't have to tell me anything, but I'm here." He didn't say anything for a long time, just stood there, gripping the counter like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Then, slowly, he started talking. He told me about his ex-partner, a man he'd loved for years, and a kid they'd been raising together. Little girl who wasn't his by blood, but who he'd loved like she was. The relationship had fallen apart, messy and painful, and the custody battle that followed had torn him to pieces. He'd moved here to escape the memories, to start over, but the guilt and the grief were still eating him alive. By the time he finished, he was crying, and I was too. I reached for his hand, and he didn't pull away. That was the moment I knew I was in deep. Not just because I cared about him, but because I wanted to carry some of that weight for him. I wanted to be the person he could lean on, the one who made the hard days a little easier. But I was terrified of screwing it up, of opening myself up to someone who might not be ready, or who might leave when things got tough. The rest of that first year was a dance of getting closer and pulling back. We'd have these moments brushing hands while passing a dish, catching each other's eyes across a crowded room that felt like they could tip into something more. But every time we got close, one of us would retreat. For me, it was fear of getting hurt again. For James, it was the shadow of his past, the fear that he didn't deserve to be happy after everything he'd lost. By the end of that year, though something shifted, it was a cold December night, and we were sitting by a fire pit in my backyard, wrapped in blankets, the stars sharp above us. He looked at me, his eyes reflecting the flames, and said, "I don't know how to do this, Ethan, but I want to try." My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe, but I leaned in and kissed him. It was soft, tentative, but it felt like coming home. That kiss didn't fix everything. We still had our fears, our doubts, our pasts to wrestle with. But it was a start, a spark in the quiet of our little lives. And I knew I'd do whatever it took to keep it burning. The months after that kiss were a whirlwind of emotions, hope, fear, joy, and everything in between. James and I were trying to figure out what we were to each other, and it wasn't easy. We weren't kids anymore, and we both came with scars that didn't fade overnight. But there was something about being with him that made me want to be braver, to take risks I'd spent years avoiding. Our days settled into a rhythm, but it was anything but routine. We'd spend mornings working side by side, me on my laptop, him sketching designs for furniture he wanted to build. He'd always been good with his hands, and watching him work was like watching art come to life. His fingers were calloused, but gentle, and I'd find myself distracted, stealing glances at him while he sanded wood or measured a plank. He'd catch me sometimes and grin, this shy, lopsided smile that made my stomach flip. But it wasn't all easy. James's past was like a shadow that followed him everywhere. He'd get these calls from his lawyer, and I'd see the way his shoulders tensed, the way his eyes would go distant. The custody battle was still ongoing, even from hundreds of miles away, and every update seemed to chip away at him. I wanted to help, but I didn't know how. I'd try to make him laugh, or I'd cook him dinner, simple things, like roasted chicken or pasta with too much garlic, but sometimes all I could do was sit with him, let him be quiet, and hope that was enough. One night, he showed me a picture of his daughter, Lily. She was 6, with big brown eyes and a smile that could break your heart. "She's why I keep fighting," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Even if I don't get to see her, I need to know she's okay." I didn't know what to say, so I just held him, my arms around his shoulders as he leaned into me. It was the first time I really understood how much he was carrying, and it made me love him even more. Love. That word scared me as much as it thrilled me. I hadn't said it out loud yet, and neither had he, but it was there. In the way we moved around each other, in the way we'd linger at the end of a night, neither of us wanting to be the first to leave. I'd lie awake sometimes, wondering if I was enough for him, if I could be the kind of partner he needed. My last relationship had ended badly. Too many arguments, too many unmet expectations, and I was terrified of repeating those mistakes. James had his own fears. He'd open up to me in pieces, telling me about his ex, about the years of trying to make it work, about the guilt he felt for leaving. "I thought I was doing the right thing," he told me once, sitting on my couch with a glass of wine in his hand. "But sometimes I wonder if I just ran away." I wanted to tell him he was brave, that starting over took more courage than staying in a place that was breaking him. But instead, I just listened, letting him talk until the words ran out. We had our fights, too. Not big, dramatic ones, but the kind that come from two people trying to figure out how to fit their lives together. I'd get frustrated when he'd shut me out, retreating into himself when things got hard. He'd get annoyed when I'd push too much, trying to fix things that weren't mine to fix. But we always found our way back to each other, usually over a cup of coffee or a walk on the beach, talking until the tension melted away. One of the best moments came in the spring when we decided to plant a garden together. It was James's idea. He'd always wanted one, he said, but never had the chance. We spent a whole weekend digging up dirt, planting tomatoes and herbs, laughing when we realized neither of us really knew what we were doing. By the end of it, we were covered in mud, our clothes ruined, but I don't think I'd ever been happier. He looked at me, his face smudged with dirt, and said, "This is what I want, Ethan, this." I knew he wasn't just talking about the garden, but the shadow of his past never fully went away. One day, he got a call that changed everything. His ex had agreed to let him see Lily, but it meant going back to the city for a week. He was a mess of nerves, excited, but terrified. And I could see the war in his head, hope, fighting against the fear of being hurt again. I wanted to go with him, but he said he needed to do this alone. "I'll be back," he promised, and I believed him, but it didn't stop the ache in my chest when he drove away. That week was the longest of my life. I kept busy, working on projects, fixing up the house, but my mind was on him. I'd check my phone 100 times a day, hoping for a text, a call, anything. When he finally came back, he looked different, lighter somehow, but also exhausted. He told me about seeing Lily, about how she'd run into his arms and called him Papa like no time had passed. But he also told me about the arguments with his ex, the legal mess that was still hanging over him. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," he admitted, and for the first time, I wondered if he might leave not just the town, but me. I didn't know how to fix it, but I knew I couldn't lose him, so I did the only thing I could think of. I told him I loved him. It came out in a rush, one night when we were sitting on the beach, the waves crashing in the dark. He looked at me, his eyes wide, and for a second I thought I'd ruined everything. Then he kissed me, hard and desperate, and whispered, "I love you too." It wasn't a solution, but it was a promise, a tether to hold on to when things got rough. The months that followed were about building something real. We started talking about the future, not big, grand plans, but small things, like taking a trip together or maybe getting a dog. James's custody battle was still ongoing, but he was fighting for visitation, and I could see the hope starting to outweigh the fear. We weren't perfect, and we didn't have all the answers, but we were in it together, and that was enough. By the time summer rolled around again, our little garden was thriving, and so were we. We'd sit out there in the evenings, eating tomatoes. We'd grown ourselves, talking about everything and nothing. James would rest his head on my shoulder, and I'd feel this quiet, steady joy that I hadn't known was possible. His secret wasn't a secret anymore. It was just part of who he was, part of the man I loved. And as we sat there, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, I knew that whatever came next, we'd face it together.